You know, I've been saying for the longest time now that I truly believe comedy and horror really at the end of the day are the same genre. And I know that sounds weird for someone to say because whenever you think of a comedy, you're laughing, you're having a fun time, you're enjoying it. Whenever you're experiencing a horror film, you're scared and terrified. But I want to talk about the methods of each genre and how it completes its goal. Either it's a comedy to make you laugh or a horror movie to make you scared. And I really believe that both genres, at the end of the day, they are the most similar that two genres could be, let alone like so similar and like completely opposite spectrums of what they try to do for you emotionally. So how's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Movie Talk, and in today's video I want to talk about why I truly believe comedy and horror at the end of the day is the same genre. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually two things: timing and pacing. So let's look at a joke for an example. You don't want to immediately rush through the entire joke and then just get straight to the punchline, because then it doesn't feel like it has enough build up. And granted, there are some ways to break this rule. I'll talk about it later, but I'll talk about also the jump scare. You don't immediately want to wait, just jump through all of the tension and build up just to get to the jump scare. I always say that the best jump scares, really, when you want to like focus on it, you want to create probably about anywhere between 30 seconds bare minimum to, I'd say, 2 minutes. 30 seconds to 2 minutes is about how much tension you want to build up to the jump scare. And I mean, you could even do it even longer. I know it's a very controversial film, but Skinamarink. That movie probably at times has like 10 minutes of build up just for the tension. And that can work too. And it just ultimately it relies on build up in order to create the suspense to make it. Same thing goes for a comedy. I always look at like what makes a really good comedy, like what makes like a joke really land really hard, is a good build up. And it doesn't need to be 30 seconds to 2 minutes. It could be as long as like 10 seconds, and it might just only need 5 seconds of build up. And it's not easy to like do an exact measurement, but ultimately you want to tell a great joke, you got to have some sort of build up. You don't watch a stand-up comedy show and they just say punchline after punchline. Whenever you think of that, even the build up, the tension, it can have a lot of funny moments too. The build up to a punchline doesn't need to just be completely stale or dry. It doesn't need to be something that's just unfunny that you're just sitting through. Same thing goes with a jump scare. I mean, that's the whole point of build up, is to create like this sense of fear and dread towards the eventual jump scare. And that's what makes it work so well, is that you don't have to focus on just not making it funny at all to make a build up to a joke. You can make people laugh and everything while you're doing the build up, but ultimately it all depends on the punchline, and that's the biggest thing that'll get a kick out of people. Same thing goes for a jump scare. You can have a lot of horrifying and scary things happening towards the build up, but ultimately a lot of it has to build up to the big final jump scare that you do. But I mean, you could also break that rule. So I like to say rules are made to be broken, and you can definitely bend the rules in order to make it towards your favor. So one of my favorite jump scares of all time was actually not even in a horror movie. It was in this film called Nocturnal Animals, and it's not really have a lot of jump scares. It's not really a horror movie. It's an intense movie. I don't think there was probably about a 30-minute section in that movie where I didn't take a single breath. It was that intense. But I say that it has one of the best like out of nowhere jump scares, because I hate, one of the things I really hate is when a horror movie will just have like a random jump scare that's just to scare you. And 9 times out of 10 that won't work. But what does the 1 out of 10 times look like? It looks something like this.
So, look, there she is. And this sounds incredible. You could actually hear her breathing, and I can talk to her if I want to. I'm sorry.
Now, that's probably one of my favorite examples of an out of nowhere jump scare because it works so effectively because it catches you completely off guard. And you don't want to use this very often because it can very easily become super cheap and just not look good. Same thing goes for a joke. You can make a joke that just comes out of nowhere and it's just a complete surprise. Those often could be the best jokes. However, you don't want to completely rely on stuff like that because then like you start to run through the same formula of just like having an out of nowhere joke. And I mean, granted, when I talk about the comedy side, it can be far less. It's not as easy to ruin it as compared to when I'm talking about the horror side. But I'm just saying in general, that's a safe rule to live by of just always having attention and build up in order to make the punchline or the jump scare work. But with all that being said, it's really timing that does the biggest heavy lifting for you that you really got to focus on. It can be an out of nowhere jump scare, an out of nowhere joke, and ultimately it all just relies on how well you time the joke. Because you can make a lot of jokes that just completely go at you punch by punch, and it's just like a constant, just joke after joke that like you're not really expecting, and that can always work. That can work really well. It's just that you run the risk of maybe ruining how good the joke could be. Another similarity that between both of these genres is subverting expectations. So you always hear about comedy, you want to subvert expectations. And same thing goes for horror movies. You don't want people to know where the jump scare is going and then it happens and it doesn't scare anyone. Same thing goes for a joke. If you know where the punchline is going when you're still doing the build up, then it's not going to be as funny as compared to whenever you're doing a joke that like you have no idea where the punchline is going, and then you get to that part and it catches you completely by surprise and it makes you have an even better impact on you. And then in case of horror movies, where it can create a false sense of security, or you feel like you have just a moment where like you know what's going to happen and you can feel safe about it, and then something completely by surprise happens. And you can also do a lot of wrong with that. For example, like it's like like a fake out jump scare and like you feel safe, and then somebody turns the corner and then all of a sudden there's a jump scare, and or like the cat, like the cat, like, they go about having a lot of tension building up, and then you just see a cat running around, and it's just that, and then you feel safe, and then the real monster jumps at you. It's again, it's very hard. It's a lot harder to do with horror movies as compared to comedies, but I mean, they both have their own separate set of challenges. But really, especially with horror movies, is you want to focus largely on subverting expectations. And that can really come true with comedy, where like you can still tell a good joke where people kind of had to not have an idea where it's going at. But I always say that like some of my favorite comedy is like people that just like say stuff like you don't really know what they're going to say next, and it's always like somehow managed to be like even funnier than what you had in your head. And I think that's another similarity that really ties both genres, is that they're just a lot of what makes separates the good from the great is if you can subvert your expectations and somehow manage to be like even better than what you had in your head. Another underrated part about comedies and horrors is that they really do oftentimes reflect the times. So take a horror movie for example. Like let's look at Get Out. That's a really good example where it kind of really does reflect on racial issues in a modern lens, like what it looks like now. And it's a way on like a very honest film. And then like keeping on that topic, like Sorry to Bother You, where it goes into racial issues, but also with like capitalism and corporations and stuff like that. It's a lot of movies like these that oftentimes do a lot of work with reflecting on like what the times are today. I really think that's another big reason where why people will say that comedies don't age well. And a lot of that is because comedies really focus on like what the times are right then and there. And so they can age you either really well or really poorly. But a lot of it has to do with just like where the state is of people are at that point. And it's a good like window into what life kind of was like, because I hear a lot about like people will say that something like super bad doesn't age well, and it's a good example of like seeing like what life was back in, when was it even made, 2007. That feels weird to say that movie came out in 2007. I wasn't even, it's not like I was even a teenager at that time, but still it feels weird to know that wow, the movie's about as old as I am. Anyways, that's not the point. The point is that like I feel like that's going to be the case for some movies. Like I can see like something like Booksmart or Eighth Grade being a movie that people talk about 20 years from now and saying like that movie didn't really age very well. And I can see a lot of that stuff happening because a lot of comedies are kind of just windows into what life was like. And that can also be said with like comedies that age really well. And it could show that like times still are kind of like that, or like it's still at the end of the day a funny movie. And that can still be said for what Booksmart in eighth grade, where that they can still end up being very well aged movies depending on how times goes. But that's still the point I'm trying to make, is that a lot of comedies really feel like they're just a window into what life was like. But I mean, I do feel like comedy and horror really are just the best genres in terms of social commentary. Because you can look at just about any kind of topic that you want to do. And chances are, there's probably a comedy or a horror movie that's kind of covered those topics, because they're always the best ways to discuss it in terms of like really serious matters, where like they can use a representation of that in the horror movie and then project it into what it's like in the real world. Or the same thing with a comedy, where it can make a satire of it, and like we can laugh at it but still know that it's like a serious actual issue. And they both work in their own unique separate ways. They're both different lanes of how they tackle the issue, but ultimately they both still do the same job and working to get to what they wanted to say. But to wrap up the video, those genres, two genres of comedy and horror, yes, the two completely opposite genres in terms of what they do for you emotionally. But they also are like very similar with how they take that path and what they do to get to that path. They both rely on using your emotions and playing with them to get to whatever they want. You can either with a comedy that's making you laugh so hard that your stomach is hurting and your cheeks are hurting because of just how hard you're laughing, or like with a horror movie where like it just fills you with just so much dread and just you just want to crawl into a ball and just cry. And I mean, again, also the sadness part. So many comedies are also some of the saddest movies I've ever watched. Same goes for horror movies, where they can both have, that's the biggest emotion that connects both of them, is sadness. They both can make you cry, because I have a little idea for another video about like why comedic actors can often like make us be the most attached to, and that's another topic for another time. But in terms of talking about these genres, they both really do connect with your emotions and make you really feel something. And that's the biggest thing that makes both comedies and horror movies work so well, is at the end of the day, it's your emotions and your emotional attachment to these films. But this really does play into what I really love most about films. For anywhere between 90 minutes or 120 minutes, maybe even longer. But for that small amount of time, it's just a tiny part of our day. And for the characters that we're watching, I mean, this could be like big moments in their lives, and over the span of days, weeks, months, years, decades, maybe even. And it's so much of their life that you see, and it's all compressed into just 90 minutes. And for that 90 minutes, we can fall in love with these characters, we can laugh and cry with them, and it just brings the most powerful emotions that you can possibly feel for people who don't even exist, that you've only known for 90 minutes at that point. And it's what I love most about film is that you can just be trapped in someone else's world for a small time, for a small little bit of your day, and just don't not worry about anything else that's going on with your life, and just see these people just living. But I mean, you've made it to the end. So I mean, if you've watched this far in the video, I mean, subscribe to the channel. I love talking about all these different video essay type ideas. And I also do a lot of reviews. I do box office updates. I do a lot of different news things about movies. And I do a lot of different topics, just all surrounding my favorite thing in the world of movies. And I mean, that's really all I have to say about the topic. I mean, I pretty much summed it up pretty well of like what makes comedy and horror so well and so work perfectly. And I mean, that's really about all I have to say. I mean, thank you so much for watching. Like I said, subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment down below your own thoughts, your own feelings. I mean, do you agree with me, disagree with me? I love to hear all of that you have to say. And I mean, that's really all that's left to say, really. So that's movie talk. See ya.